Welcome to my conservator and conservation science friends, to devoted meditation students. Welcome to artists and to everyone else. Gratitude to our funders and to Claire Ryan and Liz Gold for their help in this. This large calligraphy on wallboard is considered to be many things: a profound work of sacred art, a beautiful calligraphy, a piece of history, a really damaged artifact, a conservation challenge, and perhaps it's only 2/3 authentic. But it always inspires a lively discussion. I work internationally as a conservator of Buddhist art for governments, for monasteries, museums, universities, and Dharma centers. In 1970, I began researching sacred art in monasteries in India and Nepal, and interviewing Buddhist teachers, as well as traditional painters and sculptors. I research and document change in traditional Buddhist art forms, including the work of master painters who are also respected Buddhist teachers and lineage holders. In order to preserve traditional and evolving sacred art treasures, documentation and technical information is crucial. For the sake of this generation, but also especially to preserve them for future generations. In this presentation, we're documenting the large calligraphy, "I am here, Mukpo." Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche was an early and influential Buddhist teacher who was also a serious artist, trained as a Thangka painter and calligrapher in the Buddhist tradition in Tibet. When he moved to the West, his painting methods and materials changed due to the lack of traditional colors and binders. Significantly, his own artistic expression expanded into flower arranging, art installations, photography, and more. Trungpa Rinpoche was interested in science, and our work together on preservation of his own paintings was detailed and specific, as he gave me direct instructions on how he wanted me to save them, please. I worked with him on preservation of most of his own artwork and entered into discussion about preservation of traditional Buddhist art and into the nature of impermanence as it relates to art conservation. For example, the reproductions of his paintings are from original paintings that I restored according to his specific instructions. For art conservators, and welcome to those who are here today, it's valuable to have dialogue with living artists, including discussing an artist's own intention, and in this case, how it incorporates the Buddhist approach to both the creation and preservation of their own artwork. For one thing, impermanence is a core teaching of Buddhism, and working with impermanence can be a real challenge for conservators. Working with a living artist is beneficial for informed conservation treatment. Working with a traditionally trained artist is beneficial for a conservator to become informed about methods and materials. And working with a traditionally trained artist who also works with contemporary media and is communicative about his wishes for conservation of these artworks is a very rare opportunity. Beginning in the 1970s, I conducted inventories of Buddhist treasures, not only for museums, but also in monasteries at Karma Choling, Rocky Mountain Dharma Center, local city meditation centers, and also by request of the treasures in Trungpa Rinpoche's homes. I found this painting crumpled up in a trunk in the basement of his Boulder home. I brought it to him. He seemed really upset and asked me to save it, please. I discussed with him conservation treatment options, being a science-trained conservator, very serious. And after we agreed on a course of action, I enacted humidification and stabilization treatment to relax and flatten the crumpled painting on cloth. Then he asked me to paint out all of the damage. We discussed which paints to use, and I promised to do so at a later date. It was painted in an Eastern Tibetan style of painting with thin washes of color and sharp detail in a vast and spacious landscape. This is one of the paintings that's the rare category of artwork by meditation masters who are also master painters, and one who paints a tanka or a calligraphy from his own meditation vision. Let's talk about two tankas that Trungpa Rinpoche created, Padmasambhava and Yumka Dechen Gyalmo. Here's Trungpa Rinpoche painting one of them in India. In this 1971 image by Blair Hansen, one of the two tankas is on the wall in 4 Mile Canyon in Colorado. The Venerable Trungpa Rinpoche would visit my conservation studio in Halifax to closely examine what tankas I was working on and to enjoy tea. In this image, Trungpa Rinpoche is viewing the Padmasambhava and Yeshe Seogyal tankas by Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche, his brother. At that time, the paintings were still in their original textile mountings chosen by the artist in the full traditional tanka form. For his own paintings, Trungpa Rinpoche wanted me to protect them from his devoted students who were misinformed about preservation and wanted to touch the art to get blessings, according to him. His traditional tanka paintings had been rolled, unrolled, and crunched by his students during transport, usage, and adoration. In the 1970s, together, we designed a shadow box installation that set the tankas deep into the frame using UV filter plexiglass. And this framing technique still presented the traditional view of these tankas, the full tanka form. This installation technique was subsequently used in museums, and some are still, decades later, in their original shadow box frames. They've withstood decades of storage, shipping, handling, and display. And Trungpa Rinpoche and I designed this shadow box frame. When we placed his tankas in the protective frames, he told me that, and you could see the damage, that if the paintings were ever to be restored in the future, he wanted me to paint out all of the damage on these and all of his other paintings. He even chose what kind of paint I was to use. You could see the damage that disturbed him to his original paintings. Usually, as a conservator, I choose to stabilize the condition and leave evidence of historic blessings, offerings, and usage. But Trungpa Rinpoche wanted the iconography of his vision paintings to be unobstructed for those who viewed them at the time and well into the future. This approach is significant for our topic of the day, the calligraphy, I am here, Mukpo. Therefore, years later, when his family and community wanted reproductions of his paintings, I was asked to remove the tankas from the safety of their shadow box frames, and further to remove the paintings from the tradition of their original textile mountings, which he himself had chosen, to stabilize the condition of the paintings and in paint. I remembered his expressed wishes on how he wanted his paintings to look, undamaged. The reproductions that are for sale, therefore, look almost perfect. This is significant because for conservators, after the work of art has been stabilized for condition, further aesthetic integration of lost detail is often up for discussion. For tankas, for example, some owners or guardians wish them to appear perfect, up to the standard of Western paintings you see in museums, the great master paintings look perfect, but they're not. Other owners or guardians, for example, monasteries, anthropology museums, and ethnographic museums, wish the history of usage to be visible. After the paintings were removed from the protective frame and from their original textile mountings, after they were photographed for reproduction, the paintings were never returned to the traditional textile mountings of his own choice. The original paintings are now framed in Western style frames, flat, and they're in deep storage, unseen. I saved the original textiles and our original deep shadow box frames for decades, and finally, recently, recreated the original tanka form using a print of the painting. That's why it looks so perfect. I inserted the print into the original textile mounting. Here are two friends appreciating my recreation of the original form. Trungpa Rinpoche's three protector paintings, Ekajati, Mahakala, and Vajrasadhu, were blessed on the back. This image shows residue of poor quality tape used in framing by his early students. During his life and after his death, I conserved his paintings, again, according to his specific instructions. The paintings were damaged, and he asked me to bring them back to how they looked from his vision. And then the prints that were made from the in-painted original paintings were reproduced and reproduced. And therefore, they look absolutely flawless, as if they'd never been rolled or never traveled. The prints look absolutely in perfect condition. This is because he requested me to do this. This is mentioned again because it can be something to consider for any plans to reproduce in print form or in digital form the I Am Here Mukpo calligraphy, the topic of the day. This painting of Karmapa Mikyo Dorje on the cover of the Reign of Wisdom book was given to Trungpa Rinpoche by a student. When it was given, it was in a full tanka form. It was huge and very, very fragile. I asked him how he would like me to conserve it. We talked about it quite a while, how far he wanted me to go with conservation treatment from a science point of view, from an ethical point of view. We agreed that I should stabilize the structure of the painting. Then he explained that he wanted me to compensate or in-paint some of the damage, but not all of it. And he was quite selective about which damage he wanted to be visually erased. Let's put it that way. For example, this is a black and white in high contrast of the original painting. And in the reproduction, you could see that some of the lines of water damage are visible and some are not. He selected that I disappear some of them, and there were more of them, and just visually reduce others of them. That was his specific instruction. There's far more detail about that. And if any of you are interested, I'd be really glad to discuss it with you at a future time. Trungpa Rinpoche was an accomplished calligrapher, and he truly enjoyed the process as well as the product. His skillful calligraphies are collected and reproduced a lot. Many of his calligraphies are, well, how can I put it? Well, they've been adored by his students. And they've been put in frames by past and current owners. However, much of the framing may have acidic mat board and non-protective glazing, and the mat board isn't deep enough and have been displayed in too much light. And for example, this calligraphy, recently donated to a meditation center, is discolored and in an outdated and not protective framing package. It had been on the wall in a sunny living room for a long time, and then stored down a damp basement. Now that you've seen some examples of Trungpa Rinpoche's directives for conservation of his own artwork, let's talk about the conservation and creation of the large I Am Here Mukpo calligraphy. In the early 1980s, in an old office building called the Vogue Building, the first Buddhist meditation center was established in Halifax on Barrington Street. For a public reception and talk, Trungpa Rinpoche calligraphed the words, "I am here Mukpo," his family name, on the wall. According to someone who was there, and this is paraphrased for brevity, the whole thing was spur of the moment and improvised. The calligraphy was done with a brush and the "I am here" with a marker. The event was a ceremony. It was an open event, so lots of Sangha people were there. Rinpoche spoke a few words about people in the ceremony and asked them to compose a short poem on the spot. After that, everyone moved to the smaller room where Rinpoche did the Mukpo calligraphy on the wall and a flower arrangement. Another person who was there described it this way. Quote, "I think Rinpoche started out with the marker, 'I am.' Here. It was with a delicious sense of horror that I watched him mark the newly whitewashed wall." This is a quote. "And he didn't stop. It took a while to do the whole thing. The message was very clear and thrilling," unquote. That's from someone who was there. When the Buddhist community moved to a larger location out of the Vogue Building, they took 2 of the calligraphed wallboard panels with them because the first "I am here" M panel was structural and couldn't be moved. So the 2 panels were put in their Tara Road location. And in this picture, you can see that Ukpo, that's what it says. For years, people thought that's what the calligraphy was. It said Ukpo. In the mid-80s, members of the Buddhist community who moved to Halifax, Nova Scotia, would sign the back of the calligraphy with the date of their arrival. And this is part of the entire calligraphy that's often not seen. Some of the people have died. Some have moved away from Nova Scotia, but many are still here. I'll show you some close-ups and see if some of you recognize some names. When the Canadian Museum of Immigration at Pier 21 wanted to include the entire calligraphy in an exhibit, in a formal museum exhibit, I was asked to reconstruct the missing panel. Working with a talented graphic designer, Erica Alanak, who's with us today, I was asked to, well, let's say we relate to Dek Young's question when we started out about, well, basically forgery and artistic copyright and all that. I was asked to completely recreate the first panel. Erica and I utilized one of the rare photos of the entire wall, which shows the panels at a slight angle. Erica vectored the angle and projected the outline of the calligraphy on the missing panel onto a new wooden panel that had been prepared with similar colored paint. I traced the projection and then, using images of the original, recreated the missing calligraphy. "I am here, M." Because I was familiar with the artist's brushstrokes, I was able to recreate them. I'm not using a marker, which apparently he used for those words. I also use details from historic photos as a reference for recreation for the closest detail of every nuance of his calligraphy. Since the original calligraphy ink had faded and streaked, I wanted to use color that matched how it looked at the time, but would not change. Therefore, I used paint formulated for conservation work. It is stable, and it's also easy to distinguish with simple analysis from the original Sumi ink. The results were very well received. Here's the original, and here's the recreation process and the recreation. Recreating I Am Here Mukpo panel was possible because I was familiar with his brushstrokes. It's interesting, conservators who work with conservation of one particular artist quite a bit will tell you how they often developed an informed and intuitive connection with the original artist's brushstrokes. People who visited the formal exhibit at Pier 21 seemed fascinated by the story of the reconstruction, but probably would not have even noticed if the museum exhibitors had not included that in the label. That's how it looked in its formal display case. Following the exhibit at Pier 21, the calligraphy in its frame, large and vulnerable, was moved to an elementary school. Located in a school classroom, the calligraphy was near a fridge, a microwave, an electric kettle, chairs, and art projects, which created all sorts of risks to its condition. And then it was moved into storage once again, moved again. We hope that it was dark storage. The past, we talked about its creation and where it has been. Now we're going to talk about the present. The present. Recently, it has been moved into Karma Chungchup Ling, KCCL, a Buddhist residential meditation center in Halifax, Nova Scotia. When it arrived, it was placed into storage again, where it was stored by a bright window, right near a bright window. Light damage is cumulative and irreversible. Let's say that a conservative measurement of safe light for this type of calligraphy would be 5 foot candles or 50 lux. There I am with my illuminameter there. Oh, and it read 400 foot candles. That was storage in too much light. The calligraphy panels came out of storage again, and installation began in a reception room on the main floor. It was a wonderful event. This is our happy installation team. The fine carpenter, Jim D'Ambrosi, created a simple black matte frame for it, for this installation at KCCL. The KCCL Buddhist Center held an official online unveiling ceremony that was very popular on video due to COVID restrictions. Let's talk about its conservation condition assessment. This is in the present. You've seen images from the calligraphy I Am Here Mukpo from its past. all the times it was moved, on display, in the classroom, several Buddhist centers, in storage. And now it's incorporated in a new installation. Yes, this calligraphy has encountered serious risks and there has been damage. Please remember that the artist, Trungpa Rinpoche, strongly stated to me that he wanted his artwork to carry his original message and not become damaged from his students' handling of it. He wanted me to save it from my students. And if it were damaged, he requested that I stabilize the damage and visually compensate for it. Upon close examination, it appears that portions of the original calligraphy had been touched up sometime in the past in undocumented ways by who knows whom, possibly to freshen up the white. This is an image I took during my recreation when I was documenting the condition of the original. This documentation, for example, this image, is very useful for when I'm working on it now, years later. Now, there's serious gouges and scrapes. They go below the original latex white paint and the black calligraphy strokes into the body of the wallboard. Areas of the wallboard are separating, most likely from it being moved. Areas of white paint and black calligraphy on the edges of the panels are also damaged. Previous areas of undocumented color correction or layers of paint from the past, I don't know who applied these, his students, are becoming more visible now with exposure to light and humidity changes over time. You can see the shadows around. There are scattered red spots that appear to have come from the elementary school. They're easily water soluble, and any moisture near it would cause the red color to wick out into the white and into the calligraphy. Quite dangerous. So therefore, they had to be reduced with a scalpel mechanically. We're still working on that. There are so many greasy fingerprints on the 1/4 of it. As you're facing it, the left lower quarter where little children could be. It's kind of like the greasiness that comes from Play-Doh or something. And the grease has gone right into, permeated into the latex paint. So I'm working on that as well. At the Pier 21 exhibit in this beautiful frame, the 3 panels were set deep into the frame. This has created a dark area of abrasion and discoloration horizontally across all 3 panels and is cleaner below the line where it was protected in the frame and not so clean above. It's not just a streak of dirt, it's deep kind of abrasion with some of the blue paint in it. Please remember that this presentation includes images and discussion of the approach of a trained conservator to working with the living artist, who gave me clear instructions on the legacy care of his own art. We are respecting his vision when we present his art as closely as possible to his original intent before the damage occurred. To do that, let's talk about risk assessment. The future. Longevity for future generations depends on the care of current guardians. If you'd like to know more about risk assessment, a good place to start is our website, where we've developed this risk assessment model for Dharma centers and monasteries. Risk assessment is meant to prevent damage. A good place to start with risk assessment is what we used to call inherent vice. But what we're looking at is, what is the artwork made out of? How is it made? The methods and materials. Thank you to my respected conservation colleagues who shared their expertise and experience when I posted on a conservation distribution list asking about wallboard. Sorry about that. It's probably from a monastery asking me about care of something in the monastery. I get a lot of those calls and I always answer, but right now we're doing this. So this is according to my colleague, George Schwartz. If it's any of these types of wallboard, then it ought to remain structurally stable for many years if kept dry. The latex paint is a weak point as we don't know its exact composition. But if not exposed to the elements or light, it should remain stable. And assuming it's white, the pigments, mineral base would be fine, but we don't know about the longevity of the binder. It can be troublesome. The sumi ink is essentially carbon black, so it should be stable over time, although there are several types of sumi ink. So we can be aware of the risk of water and high humidity to this calligraphy. If you take the risk assessment approach, so much damage can be prevented by low cost and very practical actions. For example, this chair is just too close. We're suggesting installation of a low barrier like museums have in front of a painting to keep chairs and people from getting too close to the calligraphy again. These flowers are too close. The fibers of wallboard can be swelled with water. So an accident could be quite harmful, plus staining from the petals and the pollen onto the white. Let's talk about lighting for this calligraphy. Why lighting is so important? It's important for two reasons. For preservation, because light damage is cumulative and irreversible, and for metamerism. Light damage is really important for any tanka you own, any calligraphy. So this should be of interest. A major risk to the longevity of it is light damage. I post a lot with science facts, and here's a post I did on Facebook, which got quite popular, where I'm in a Dharma center and I measure the light levels on this very rare painting. This is what I wrote, quote, "Work today measuring environmental conditions for lineage treasures at a Dharma center. I am using a remote data logger to measure ambient temperature, relative humidity, and light levels through the day, but also using a digital luminometer to measure light exposure of this rare painting by Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche, also known as OT. A light intensity measurement of 5-foot candles, 50 lux, is recommended for paintings like this. And we have measured almost 200-foot candles in the late morning light today. Again, light damage is cumulative and irreversible. So what can be done? Simple actions. Locate your light-sensitive art away from the windows and away from bright room lights. Rotate your art on display and put them in dark storage for part of the year. And other low-cost and practical solutions, I'd love to hear from you and we can discuss them. Lighting in the room is very important, not only to prevent damage, but from metamerism. That means that if you have this calligraphy under one type of light bulb or one lighting situation, and the same calligraphy under another light bulb or different lighting situation, they look completely different. So you could imagine that all the changes that have been made to the white and the black through the years would definitely show up when you change the lighting. So it's really important for conservators to know when they're doing any compensation, visual compensation, what type of light it will be displayed in the future. It would be wonderful to know that. The naturally pebbly texture of the surface makes metamerism even more obvious. So we're suggesting that the Dharma Center use ambient light for this, overall ambient light in the room, and no spotlights, nothing bright. The future is in your hands. The longevity of this calligraphy and other sacred art for future generations depends on you, the current guardians. Our time together today is closing on our discussion of the I Am Here Mukpo calligraphy on wallboard. I want to know, do you consider it to be a profound work of sacred art, a beautiful calligraphy, a piece of history, a damaged artifact, a conservation challenge, and perhaps only 2/3 genuine? We can now have a lively discussion. I think I promised Dekyang, because she didn't have bandwidth to answer her question. So she asked a question about artistic copyright, that because I actually created, with the help of Erica, the graphic artist, that we created 1/3 of the I Am Here Mukpo calligraphy. She is a librarian and wanted to know about artistic copyright, because there's strong intellectual copyright protections for artists, the US, Canada, Europe, and several other countries. This means that the artist, the creator, regains control over reproduction rights, or their heirs, of their own art, no matter who actually owns it legally. So it's a very interesting question, Dekyang, for conservators, because we're trained to create and recreate in the style of the original artist. I actually did a survey on a conservation distribution list about conservators' ideas about this. And the thing is that, well, conservators could be very good forgers. And in addition, we've been featured in mystery novels and films as expert forgers. But her question has to do with whether I did this as an artist or as a conservator. And I think in the future, this is going to come up more, especially if 1/3 of it is recreated. And I think it's going to be written into contracts in the future. It's a very interesting question, Dekyang, coming from a librarian. And I did take a survey of my conservation colleagues of their opinions about this. It's actually a point of discussion. I believe that people should know if they're not looking at something that is done by the originating artist, in this case, Trungpa Rinpoche. I feel that strongly that on a label near the display, it should be explained. So I hope that answers your question. I'm sure it'll rouse more discussion from the conservators and other people. Karen, I'm sure you have things to say about this. And okay, but let's go on to the second question, which is from Rochelle. Rochelle, your question, please.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation, Anne. It was so informative. I was just wondering if the panels were made in 1981 and it's lasted so far. How long do you think it will last for future generations?
Yeah, it depends on two things. That's the composition, the wallboard, the original white paint, the sumi ink, etc. Yes, the original, but it also depends on the current guardians and what care they take. We have gone through the history of this calligraphy. It was created, and then it was moved, and then it was recreated, and then it was displayed, and then it was moved to a school, elementary school, and then it was put into storage, and then it was moved again, put into bright storage, and then reinstalled, etc. And that is a lot of handling. So let's hope that the current guardians will respect the possibility of the I Am Here Mukpo calligraphy to be there to inspire future generations. And the risk assessment model helps with this. And hopefully very low cost and practical steps will be taken to protect it from damage in the future. Does that answer your question, Rochelle?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you so much for all the work you put into it, because it really is a treasure.
Thank you.
And it was kind of like this Trungpa Rinpoche came to Nova Scotia and put his stamp on I am here. You know, so that was very important for our community. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I promised that I would read a question from Acharya Tashi, who's a Buddhist monk. He sent us a question. This came in via email. Quote, what did Vidyadhara tell you about preserving his own art, the paintings and calligraphies? Was he interested in art conservation, unquote? And the reason that I didn't start out talking about I Am Here Mukpo calligraphy, I really wanted to share with you the extent to which Trungpa Rinpoche was patiently explaining to me exactly how he wanted me to work with his own creations. And that would, in the end, include I Am Here Mukpo. And he was fascinated by the science of conservation and was so specific about which paints I should use and how far I should go in restoration. He always liked stabilization treatment. He was all for that. And he also was very interested in mechanisms of display that would protect his art. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you to Ocean for hosting. And I look forward to hearing from all of you with your specific questions. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ann.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Anne.
Thanks, Ann.